Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. And also those fellow worshipers who are in other parts of the world. I would like to continue this reflection on this first reading from this beautiful letter of Paul to the Christians of Corinth. And we have here today actually the whole chapter 15 of this first letter of Paul to the Corinthians is dedicated to this issue or topic of the resurrection of Christ and its implications, especially also our own resurrection. So we see here a kind of a argumentation presented by Paul. No, it seems to be that there were those who denied that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. No, in that time, as also in our times. No, and that type of reasoning of Paul is set within a kind of a methodology popular during that time, the so-called the rabbinic methodology, and constructed according to this popular way of argumentation. They call it, for those who have studied logic in college, they must remember still this, the reductio ad absurdum, they would say, or per absurdum, argument to absurdity, a form of argument that attempts to establish a claim by showing that the opposite scenario would lead to absurdity or contradiction. And Paul wants to show this a kind of redundancy which the resurrection of Christ has in the life of the believer. So if one denies this, then the implications would be the absurdity of this belief. No. So the negation, the denial of such implication, which is our resurrection, drags with it the negation also of the resurrection of Christ. If Christ has not risen, so also we will not, the efficacy of this would be denied also. No. So when one denies the resurrection of Christ, this drags with it the negation also of His glory, His own divinity, and therefore also our Christian faith. The denial of Christian faith brings with it also the denial of our own salvation and ultimately our hope. So all this therefore leads to absurdity, as Paul would admonish, because the church, the proof that Paul would place is that the experience of the presence of the Spirit in the life of Christian has testified one thing, that the presence of the Spirit of the risen Lord has given freedom, liberation to people who believe, liberation from evil. And this was one of the concrete proofs that indeed Christ is alive, Christ is risen. Our freedom as children of God. So, Christ is truly risen, working thus for the full recovery of God in that humanity which He assumed in His own incarnation. In other words, Paul tried really to place this, the resurrection of Christ, and argued that indeed Christ has risen, and it becomes the very foundation of our faith. Because what would be the meaning of faith? What would be the meaning of life? What would be the meaning of love, of hope in this world, if everything ends in the tomb? Period. Wala na. What would be the meaning of life? No. So he wanted to show here that yes, the Christ has risen, and there is reason to continue to hope, to love, to serve, to do what is good, to do what is honorable, because that goodness, that victory of Christ reigns. Dear friends, in the midst of the challenges, the experience of so many frustrations and difficulties, the death of our loved ones sometimes lead us to question, saan ang patutungo ang buhay? And God, especially through the witness of Paul, who experienced really the risen Lord in his conversion, and he placed this as the foundation of our Christian life. The Eucharist, the Word of God proclaimed, has meaning because it has been guaranteed that the one who spoke this, the one who gave himself in the Eucharist, is alive, risen, and he has called us to participate precisely in this life. What a beautiful gift, what a beautiful truth to guide us, to as light in our journey that at times proved to be difficult and dark. The Mass, the Eucharist, is indeed a celebration of our faith in the risen Lord. What we receive is not a dead Christ. It is a risen Lord. This is signified, for example, I do not know if you pay attention to the Mass, because in the consecration, this is my body. The blood, the bread and wine are consecrated separately, denoting, for example, the death of Christ on the cross, giving His body and blood, to signify His death. But I do not know if you pay attention that the priest, after the consecration, before the communion, he places a piece of bread into the chalice to signify precisely that what we are going to receive is the risen Lord. Now, meaning the body and blood together representing, signifying that Christ, that what we receive is the risen Lord. Dear friends, let our communion with the risen Lord in the Eucharist, with His Word, powerful Word, and the Eucharist, give us strength in our journey through life.